Coates, who for 2.5 years was Trump's director of national intelligence, all the intelligence agencies, including the CIA. They don't have all the information, but this is so strange. It is so subservient on Trump's part. He actually asked, is this blackmail? In other words, is Trump being blackmailed?
Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. I'm just honored to be here today with investigative journalist and author of the latest book, War, which was released this week. He shared in 2 Pulitzer Prizes for his work at the Washington Post, one for coverage of the Watergate scandal, of course, and the other for the 9/11 attacks. It's Bob Woodward. Bob, welcome to the Bulwark Podcast.
Thank you.
I want to spend most of this discussion talking about your reporting about Donald Trump. We are the Never Trumper podcast, of course. But first, I want to get into a couple of the items of the Ukraine, because you really have some astonishing new revelations about the Biden administration's work there. One in particular, there have been critics of the Biden administration from the right, including some on this podcast, who argued that they let the Putin nuclear threat deter them from pushing for more aggressive action from Ukraine. And your reporting shed some light on why that may have been and just how serious the nuclear threat actually was. So I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yes, I think if you look at what is really important that's going on, it is what I call the silent shadow of nuclear weapons. And it gets to the point where their threats, we're going to use tactical nuclear weapons. And so that's something that the Biden administration needs to deal with as a way of deterring it and stopping it. Big deal. In the White House, they very much know that if any kind of tactical or any nuclear weapon is used while Biden's president, that not only stains the presidency, but it will define it. So they do everything they can to stop it.
Yeah, and the book shows on multiple parts just how good the intelligence actually was about the coming Putin invasion, and I think that also is weighs on their judgment, right, on the nuclear weapon question, because they consider it to be about a 50-50 proposition. You report at one point that Putin's thinking about using it. Yes,
at one point it went through a kind of a 5. These are intelligence assessments, which are the best they have. It started with a 5% likelihood and finally became a 50%. And in the White House, in the National Security Council, they realized that 50% reduces it to a coin flip. The idea that tactical nuclear weapons could be used in this war was, quite frankly, frightening. And the Deputy National Security Advisor, John Feiner, in kind of assessing the emotional level of what they were dealing with and the strategic level, realized that this is what it must have been like in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, I mean, there was discussion and scuttlebutt about this, obviously, in the news and in the daily kind of coverage of events. But I just... how close they felt like it was, I think was not really appreciated broadly. And you tell one story in particular about Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's conversation with his counterpart on this question. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. I mean, what Lloyd Austin does is calls. I think this is in 2022 when the worries were greatest, and calls his counterpart, the defense minister in Russia, Shoigu, and says, we know you are contemplating the use of a tactical nuclear weapon. Don't do it. And I don't know, it's almost in the book, I have the verbatim, and you
Yeah.
see the intensity and actually the sophistication of the argument of why not to do this, and that it will change the world, and the risk is much greater than was publicly known.
Yeah. People should go check it out. The transcript you have of the Austin exchange is really could have been out of the movie Air Force One or something. It was very theatrical.
Why do you say that? I think I have it here. Yes, because what's important about this? It was confrontational. So Austin, Secretary of Defense, who kind of in the book we learn much more about him. And Austin says, we know you're to Shogu. We know you're contemplating the use of tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and goes through the information and consequences. Shogu says, I don't take, because he looks at this as it is a threat, I don't take kindly to being threatened. Austin says, Mr. Minister, I am the leader of the most powerful military in the history of the world. I don't make threats.
Wow.
That's about as steamy as it can get in terms of these high-level communications and the stakes and risks.
No doubt. There's one other critique of the Biden administration that you get from the hawkish part of the right, not the Trumpish part of the right, that may have seemed to have a little bit more salience, I think, than the nuclear critique. And that was that the chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal did impact Putin's thinking about invading Ukraine. And it seems like your reporting indicates that that was probably true.
Yes, and it's very obvious because it shows a weakness, a lack of coordination, and just a national embarrassment for the country and for the Biden administration.
Yeah. One other issue from this Ukraine period I wanted to talk to you about a little bit before we get to Donald was the vice president's role in warning Zelensky before the invasion. And again, this has been reported on, and always in these situations, it's kind of hard to tell, is the PR team puffing up the principal? Like how much really happened? Like how intimately was she involved? And the color that you provide, I think, is quite striking, frankly, about how about the vice president's role in warning Zelensky about the coming invasion. I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, what I have firsthand witnesses or notes or documents, because you're right, things can be puffed up. I think this was a case where it was not puffed up. So this is October 21st, 2022. Got Shogu on the phone. We know you're contemplating the use of nuclear weapons and tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Then Austin says, first, any use of any nuclear weapon on any scale against anybody would be seen by the United States and the world as a world-changing event. There is no scale of nuclear weapons that we could overlook or that the world could overlook. Driving it home, Austin says, any use of nuclear weapons anywhere would implicate the vital national interests of the United States. Why? Because we cannot live in a world where nuclear powers use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear powers. We can't live in that world. So you may believe that Ukraine matters more to you than to us, but in this circumstance, This matters just as much to us as it matters to you. It wouldn't matter how small the nuclear weapon is. In other words, what Austin said, there's no way to just kind of stick your toe in the water on this. Shogu listened. This was a general who really had never been in the military before becoming defense minister. So Austin persists. If you do this, it would be the first of nuclear weapons anywhere in the world in 3/4 of a century. And it could set in motion events that you cannot control and we cannot control. Now, this is very unusual in an interchange like this for a high official to acknowledge not only do you lose control, but we're acknowledging we could lose control. Our leaders and your leaders have repeatedly said a nuclear war can never be won and never should be fought. This could put us on the path of a confrontation that would have existential implications for you and for us. Don't step on that slippery slope. Austin continued, if you did this, all the restraints that have been operating under, we've been operating under in Ukraine would be reconsidered. We have taken care not to do certain things. There are certain things we haven't provided the Ukrainians. There are certain restrictions we've put on how they can use the stuff that we've given them. Again, the colloquial language. And we have not directly intervened in the conflict against your forces. In other words, no U.S. forces are involved in this directly. If you did this, all those constraints, all those restraints we have imposed on ourselves would be reconsidered. The message of direct retaliation could not be really more starkly presented. Austin delivered his final point. All these actors in the world that you think are your friends or who would look aside would turn against Russia in this scenario. The Chinese, the Indians, the Turks, the Israelis. This would isolate Russia on the world stage to a degree you Russians cannot fully appreciate. This is when Shogu finally said, I don't take kindly to being threatened. Austin said, and this is a real, you can cut it anyway.
Yeah, no, it's an astonishing exchange, really.
Yeah, and what in this case you see trying to make all of the arguments and say you are going to change. This is not just an isolated act, but you will change how Russia is perceived, not by the United States, but by the world.
Yeah, it is an astonishing exchange. And then briefly on the Harris-Zelensky exchange, on the warnings that Harris, the vice president, gave to Zelensky.
I mean, this is the leader of Ukraine, Zelensky, a Churchillian figure now. And the vice president finally says, it is really pushing it. And you can see this is not just a pro forma, paint by numbers exchange, because Zelensky finally looked at Harris directly and said, what do you want me to do? In other words, he's acknowledging that he's been kind of, maybe I'm going to have to act.
Speak like a whole new you with Babbel, the language learning app that gets you talking. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you talking a new language in just 3 weeks. And because talking is the key to really knowing a language, Babbel is designed for real conversation. Wasting hundreds on private tutors is the old way of learning languages. Babbel's tips and tools are inspired by the real-life stuff you'll actually need when talking. With a focus on conversation, you'll be ready to talk wherever you go. I just got to be honest with you. Things are pretty busy around here. You can learn a language in 3 weeks, but we're 3 weeks from the election. And so learning a language isn't at the top of my priority list, but I'm looking ahead to 2025. I'm looking ahead to it. And I already did some test drives with Babbel. And I think that it is going to be the year for me, because either I'll be fleeing the country. Not really. That's a joke. Or Kamala Harris will win. And, the podcast will be able to actually go on a vacation. We might go to a foreign country. I might want to feel good and confident when I'm ordering at the restaurant. Or maybe we go to France and I can try to keep up to speed with my 6-year-old daughter on her learning French. To do that, I am going to be turning to Babbel. Want more proof that Babbel gets you talking? Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and other leading universities continue to prove Babbel works. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. So here's a special holiday deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/bulwark. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/bulwark, spelled BABBEL.com/bulwark. Rules and restrictions may apply. Hey, y'all, if you love this podcast and want to listen to all Bulwark podcasts ad-free, join Bulwark Plus today. You can click the link in this description. You'll get the best politics newsletters in the business, and you can become a Bulwark Plus member right now. We'd appreciate it. I want to move on. Obviously, we've gotten the most attention on the Trump section of the book. I want to start with the Trump-Putin relationship. Which you write about a lot, and the thing that's gotten the most attention, I think, is the potential that they have still been talking in the post-presidency. And you report that there's a staffer who says that they've talked up to 7 times. That staffer was outside the room at one point, or shooed out of the room, rather. I guess I wonder, you've dealt with these guys so much. What is your sense of that? Is your sense of that it's really happening, or could they be lying about it? What do you think?
Well, of course they could be lying.
They're liars, so we have that problem
all the time. But just yesterday, Trump asked about it, said, "Oh, I don't comment on things like that," right, which is kind of strange. He comments on anything he wants to comment on, and then goes further and says, if I did it, that would be a good thing, which is a kind of acknowledgement. I feel and conclude from my reporting that there obviously is some sort of relationship between Trump and Putin. Putin got to remember, and it's easy to lose sight of this, what Putin's done in his invasion of Ukraine. This is what Hitler did in the 30s with Poland. I mean, it really is raw effort at territorial conquest, of taking over this country. And it's done in a very savage way. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. And if you dig into this, what's the rationale? As far as Putin's concerned, Ukraine does not exist. It belongs to him. It belongs to Russia. And there is no ambiguity about that. There is really I think one of the important points, and I'm sorry to keep going to the documentation, but the documentation is what this is about. And for Trump to say, as he did yesterday, if I did it, it's a smart thing. Now, I have in the book a direct quote from CIA Director Bill Burns saying and telling what the CIA assessment is of what Putin does. Quote, Putin manipulates. He's professionally trained to do that. Putin's got a plan, as he did when Trump was in office, at playing Trump. This is all orchestrated by Putin and Russian interest. What is really important to understand, Trump's willingness to be manipulated and controlled by Putin is staggering. Again, Putin is the Hitler of our century. He is the one who has invaded another country, tried to take it over. It currently is not going as well as it should because it turns out that Ukraine occupies, I think, latest 93 villages in Russia. So
yeah.
This Putin's ambition is overextended here, or at great risk.
Yeah. The other thing that the other person you quote on this topic of their relationship, Trump and Putin, in the book is Dan Coates, Trump's own director of national intelligence, who called the relationship an enigma, and he said, "Is it blackmail?" He wondered if it was blackmail. And this is the thing.
Coates is really. Pardon, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Just the thing that is confusing to me. I don't understand how his own director of national intelligence would not know what was happening in the relationship.
Well, I mean, it's not. I mean, he sees it. Coates, who really for 2.5 years was Trump's director of national intelligence, all the intelligence agencies, including the CIA, sees this not. They don't have all the information, but he sees it. This is so strange. It is so subservient on Trump's part. He actually asks, when I discussed this with Coates several months ago, he said, is this blackmail? In other words, is Trump being blackmailed?
I mean, that is wild. I don't think that has really sunk in for the public yet, that his own director of national intelligence suspects he might be getting blackmailed. It's not a Democrat. This is not some crazy liberal commentator. It's his own director of national intelligence that suspects that.
Yes, and one of the very important elements in all of this is to understand how good our intelligence is. As I report in the book, at one point, the United States has a human source in the Kremlin that the electronic and technical intelligence, it's never perfect, but it's much greater. So when they get into seeing war plans, it's not something that's just partial. It's a complete laydown.
Yeah. It also sheds into a different light the question about the classified documents. I know that you're reporting, not speculating, but again, he's maybe having these calls. He has these classified documents. And his own director of national intelligence is worried that there might be a blackmail situation. At minimum, I think it raises additional questions about that.
Yes, and everything Trump does, he swims in questions and doubt. And so if you pull back and try to think, who is he? He was president. I spent the year 2020, his last year of his presidency, talking to, I think I interviewed him 19 times for 9 hours. This is the year of COVID.
Yeah.
And when it's all laid out, it's frightening. Trump was warned when there was one COVID case in the United States by his own national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, coming in saying this is from our intelligence, this is coming to the United States, and it is going to overwhelm the country, and 650,000 people will likely die. And Trump had this kind of extraordinary warning. And this goes to a characteristic of Trump, which is really important, I think sometimes not fully understood. He does not even understand his own interest as president, carrying out the responsibility. If you get this kind of warning, and it's not hard. Just go to the public and you say, I've got this warning, comes from very good sources. We're going to take it seriously. We are going to plan. I once asked him, what's the job of the president? He said, to protect the public. I'm going to protect the public. And instead, that whole year, he waffled and dodged. One of the most remarkable interviews I had with him that year was July 20th, 2020. Turned out to be the last interview. And all year I'm learning from the doctors how bad the coronavirus is, the numbers in the country are piling up. And on July 20th, I said, Mr. President, 140,000 people have died from this virus already. That all he had to do was warn the public. And he keeps saying, no, it's going to go away. It's going to be fine. As I had asked before, but I ask again, what's the plan? What are you going to do? And this is one of those interviews with the sitting president where your head kind of spins. And he said, oh, don't worry, I'll have a plan. I'll have a plan in 106 days. What? 106 days. I realized that's election day.
Yeah.
He's worried about the election in 106 days. And again, this is, psychiatrists will be able to have a field day with this. Why would somebody with his extraordinary authority as president not act, not plan? Somehow got this idea that this is going to go away and that he can have a plan in 106 days. This is like somebody sitting in their house and there's a fire and somebody suggests, well, we better call 9/11, but let's wait 106 days.
Right. That's wild.
Inconceivable, irresponsible.
Yeah. And he has this combination of just recklessness, irresponsibility, and malice, and that takes us to the other kind of reveal from the book about Milley. And you paint this picture of being at a reception at the Willard, been to many of those kind of formal receptions. And he comes up to you and talks about how Trump is fascist.
General Milley, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, number one military man.
Yeah. I mean, so this is in 2023. That has to be jarring for you. On the one hand, it is clearly a very dramatic scene in the book. On the other hand, I guess my question is, if he believes what he's saying to you about the danger and how big of a fascist he is to the core, why is he saying this at at the Willard at a fundraiser or at a reception rather than like doesn't it require more from people like that? Mattis was also at this reception apparently.
Yes, but he obviously there are levels of alarm, and this was much higher. And he literally said, "We gotta talk." And he says, "I had talked." Reminded me, didn't need to, that we had talked about Trump's mental decline, but here General Milley says, "No, Trump is the most dangerous person in the world. He is an absolute fascist." And just it's a very I mean, here for a military general to make this assessment of the commander-in-chief is all the alarm bells going off.
Yeah. And you say that Mattis is also at this same reception. Mattis, in a separate part in the book, talks about his fear of Trump's recklessness with again, we're back to the nuclear question, with nuclear issues with North Korea and kind of his brinksmanship before the love letters started with him and Kim Jong-un. And so I just wonder, I mean, have you had additional conversations with Mattis about it beyond what is in the book, or do you have anything to share about your conversations that are in the book with the former defense secretary?
Well, a couple of days ago got an email from General Mattis saying he thinks the book is important. He believes it's true. And it was a kind of, hey, I understand this. And it was the strongest endorsement. Maybe I'll put it on the back of the paperback. Because General Mattis is somebody, a general, became defense secretary, somebody as respected in the military, national security world as anyone.
Yeah. Did you take that as endorsement of kind of the warnings about Trump in the book?
Yes. Oh, certainly. And an endorsement of this process of trying to explicitly say, let's make sure we don't try to downplay the threat, because the threat is high. And of course, now Trump has the Republican nomination.
Yeah. More than that. We were talking about the nuclear coin flip earlier, where we have an electoral coin flip here. Before I let you go, we have to put this in the context of Nixon, of course, given your background. So I just had two questions for you about that. One about the Trump and Nixon comparison. You write that Trump is far worse than Nixon. He's the most reckless and impulsive president of American history. I just would be interested in your sense about the similarities or differences between the two men.
Nixon, of course, got caught and eventually resigned when all of his crimes were exposed. And Nixon has disappeared into history with the knowledge by history and by the public that he disgraced the presidency, he disgraced himself, he broke the law. The reason Trump is worse, Nixon resigned, didn't run again, went around the country and the world giving speeches, but was never a political possibility. Now, Trump is more than a political possibility. He is running again. He is seeking the same office. And trying to summarize what's the problem with Trump, other than these details, he lacks two things, which we see time and time again. He doesn't have a plan. It is very Well, I think I'll say this today. I'll say that tomorrow. There's no kind of, I'm trying to talk about what I would do, what the plan would be. As alarming, he does not have a team.
Right.
You know, I know from having editors and people I work with, you do all of these things as a team. Trump has no team. You certainly can't do national security alone. And that's what he does. He just look at the things he says each day. There's no real kind of goal. It's just this came into my mind, and you cannot run. I've written about 10 presidents over the last 52 years. The presidency is an office with extraordinary power, but you can't do it alone. Look at Joe Biden's, who's done some, I think, important things, made some mistakes indeed, but Biden has a national security team. See this in the book, operating. Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, Bill Burns, the CIA director, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, the top cabinet officer, Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary. You see these people working together as a team with a common purpose. And tell me who's in Trump's team. He does not have one. People might appear, but then disappear.
Yeah, it's a good insight. All right, my final question, since this is, we're the home of the Never Trumpers, the few who resisted and left the party over him. The parallels, it's just so astonishing. And it was before my time, but like if you look back at the number of Republicans that spoke out against Nixon, I just would like to hear you kind of reflect on that and how different it was kind of following your revelations. There was maybe a little bit of a lag, but eventually many Republicans did the right thing, really, following the Nixon revelations. We didn't see that this time.
Exemplified in the case of Nixon by Barry Goldwater. Nixon met with the Republican leaders, and Barry Goldwater, the conscience of the conservatives, the Republican senator, his colleagues in the meeting with Nixon said, we asked Barry to speak for us. And Barry, in the Oval Office with Nixon, said, I've counted, because Nixon asked, what support do I have? And Goldwater says, Mr. President, I've counted. You have 5 votes if there is an impeachment trial. And that's not enough.
Right.
And that means you're going, and Nixon did resign. Now we see in the Republican Party this avalanche of support and backing for Trump.
If only we'd had Barry Goldwater instead of Mitch McConnell, we might not be in a coin flip situation. Thank you so much to Bob Woodward. Everybody go buy the book. It is War. It was a real honor to have you on the Bulwark podcast.
Thank you.
Tomorrow's pod, we are live in Philly tonight. I've got George Conway. I've got Sarah Matthews. We've got the Bulwark team. We'll have the best of it for you tomorrow. And come on out and see us if you're near Philly on Thursday night, Pittsburgh, Friday night, Detroit on Saturday night. We'll be live streaming Philly on YouTube this evening, Thursday night. So make sure to check that out as well. We'll see you all back here soon. Peace.